Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you are here for the first time, then you're most welcome, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you've not subscribed yet. And before I begin with this week's case, I'm going to say that this video is for educational purposes, and all information in this video are gathered from public sources, which is public information, and I mean no harm or disrespect to anyone mentioned in this video. Jane Gavidasamy was a 45-year-old woman who was married to Gavidasamy. The couple were married for 23 years. Together they had two children, Denisha, who was 22 years, and Nikita, who was 16 years. The Gavidasamy family lived in Longcraft, Phoenix in KwaZulu-Natal. Jane worked as an administration clerk for a logistics company, and she loved sewing in her spare time.
My sister was a very loving person, and she was very hardworking. She worked tirelessly for her families. Her girls were her life.
Denisha, the oldest daughter, met her boyfriend in 2016 when they were working for a call center. However, they started dating in 2018, and immediately after they started dating, a couple of months later, they were engaged. Denisha and her boyfriend lived together. However, someone tried to, there was an attempted break-in in their apartment, and Denisha ended up moving back home in 2018. The youngest daughter, Nikita, was 16 years old, and she was still in high school. She loved unicorns, and she had dreams of studying chemical engineering or being a doctor. From the outside, the family seemed pretty normal. However, everything was not as it seemed. Sangren, the father, worked night shifts, so his shift will begin at 2 p.m. in the afternoon and will end at 10 p.m. at night. So on the 20th of September 2018, just after 10 p.m. when Sangren got back home, and when he knocked on the door, because he didn't have keys to the flat, he knocked on the door and nobody answered. He tried to call his daughters, but nobody answered their phones. He didn't want to knock down the door because they were renting the flat, and he didn't want to get into trouble with his landlord.
And then I knocked, I called his name, and another thing why I could not bring the door is because I'm renting. I don't own it.
Yes, I know.
So he ended up going to spend the night at his mother's house. The next day, on the 21st of September 2018, Sangren came back and he knocked on the door again. However, nobody answered. So he decided to enter through one of the windows in the bedroom. And when he entered through one of the windows, he sadly discovered the body of his wife lying in a pool of blood. And when he entered another bedroom, he found the body of his 16-year-old daughter, Nikita. Sangren was obviously distraught, and he called the police, and the police arrived and they started investigating the crime scene. And the police had sniffer dogs with them, and one of the sniffer dogs started barking at one of the wardrobes in one of the bedrooms. And when the police opened the wardrobe, they suddenly found the body of 22-year-old Denisha. As the police were investigating the crime scene inside, there was also other police officers who were outside trying to control a crowd that had gathered outside the flat because they wanted to see what was going on. And then the police noticed a man who was acting suspicious, and they called this man closer, and this man started saying, "Please find the person who killed my Steki and her daughters." This man was a man named Colin Pillay. When police were talking to Colin, they noticed that he had suspicious scratches on his neck, face, and finger. And when they asked him how he got the scratches, he told police that he had been hurt whilst working with the gearbox. And obviously police didn't believe him, and they asked him to hand over his cell phone because they had few questions for him. And they asked him to go see a doctor who was at the crime scene so that he can confirm that his injuries were consistent with what he was saying. But somehow the police got distracted and Colin was able to disappear. So because he disappeared, the police put him on the suspect list. Whilst the police were talking to Colin outside before he disappeared, Sangren was being taken to the police station because he was the only person who had survived this terrible thing that had happened to his family. So the police were taking him down to the police station to ask him questions, and when he got to the police station, he said that he had an alibi for when the murders happened because he was at work, and police were able to confirm that during the time that the murders happened, Sangren was actually at work. After police confirmed that Sangren's alibi was concrete, they asked him if he knew this man, Colin Pillay, was acting suspicious, and Sangren told police that yes, he did know this man. He said that Colin and his wife Jane had had an affair several years back. Several years before, in 2012, Nikita and Denisha had told their father Sangren that every time he was at work, a man would come to their flat, and this man was Colin Pillay. So Sangren concluded that Jane and Colin were having an affair. He didn't confront them there and there. I guess he decided to catch them in the act, and one day he showed up at her workplace, and when he showed up there, he was told that Jane wasn't there. She had gone to a mall. I think it was called Phoenix Plaza. So Sangren went to catch Colin and Jane in the act, and then when he was just entering the mall, he caught Colin and Jane, and he approached them and he told Colin not to see his wife anymore. And as far as Sangren knew, the affair ended then and there 7 years ago, but little did he know that the affair continued for 7 more years until the day that Jane passed away. Colin Pillay was a 47-year-old father of 4, and he lived with his ex-girlfriend. Even though they were no longer together, they lived together for the sake of their 9-year-old daughter. Colin used to spend his nights with Jane at the Gavidasamy flat. However, when Denisha moved back home, they had to sneak around more because Denisha wouldn't approve of the affair, and that kind of made Colin very angry. However, they continued to see each other. Colin often used to fetch Jane from work, and Jane ended up telling her co-workers that Colin was her husband, and sometimes Sangren would come and fetch Jane from work, and Jane told her co-workers that Sangren, her actual husband, was actually Colin's brother. And Jane and Colin had went to the extent of attending Jane's boss's 50th birthday, and they were pretending to be a couple the whole entire night. So after the police find out that Colin and Jane have been having this affair, they go to Colin's house to ask him questions. However, when they get there, he's not there. His ex-girlfriend is there, and she tells him that yes, she knows Jane as Colin's girlfriend, and that on the day of the murders, Colin hadn't gone to work that day. He had left the house at around 2 p.m. and got back home later on that night. She didn't know what time he got back home because she was fast asleep. So police then ask the ex-girlfriend to give them the clothes that Colin had been wearing the day of the murder, and she gives them a t-shirt. However, she had washed the t-shirt. However, she hadn't gotten around to washing the jean that he had been wearing that day. And on the jean, police found blood stains, and later on they were able to confirm that the blood that was on the jean belonged to Jane, Denisha and Nikita. Since Colin had given the police his phone at the crime scene, they were able to put his cell phone at the flat at the time of the murders. But the most damning evidence against Colin was video footage that was taken from a security camera from a boutique that was a couple of meters away from where the Gavidasamy family lived. In security footage, Colin can be seen walking past the boutique at around 2 p.m. and he was wearing a jean and a t-shirt, and a couple of hours later at around 8 p.m. he can be seen walking back. And the video footage also catches Colin removing something from his pocket and taking that object and wiping it against the jean and throwing away that object, and police believe that the object was the murder knife. With all this evidence against Colin, police then arrested him for the murders of Denisha, Nikita and Jane. So what police believe happened is that the relationship between Jane and Colin was beginning to sour. Colin would send Jane a bunch of messages and Jane would only reply to 1 or 2 of those messages. And with Denisha coming back home, the relationship was very sour at the point. And on the 20th of September 2018, Jane woke up and went to work. Nikita also woke up and went to school. Colin then started sending Jane a bunch of messages. However, she ignored him that day. She only replied to 1 of his messages, and that really angered Colin, and he decided then to murder Jane. So Colin knew that Sangren worked between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. so he waited for Sangren to go to work, leaving behind only Denisha at the flat. So he made his way to the flat and he managed to get in, and he took one of the knives in the kitchen and stabbed Denisha and hid her body in one of the cupboards. Later on the afternoon, Nikita comes back from school and she's strangled and placed on the bed. And later on, after 5 p.m, Jane comes back home from 5 p.m. and Colin put a sock in her mouth and then stabbed her, and she passed away. And during one of the attacks, I'm not sure which one, but the caretaker where the apartment was heard a scream coming from the flat. However, he didn't do anything because they weren't allowed to go into the apartments. Obviously, Colin denies all this and he claims that on that day he woke up and he went to play cards. However, they didn't give any evidence to this fact, nor did he have any witnesses to prove that he was actually gambling on the day of the murders. In October 2019, a year and a month after the murders, Colin Pillay was sentenced to 3 life terms for the murders of Jane Gavidasamy, Nikita Gavidasamy, and Denisha Gavidasamy. Sangren Gavidasamy eventually moved out of the flat and he lost his job and he moved back home, and he started drinking alcohol to help ease the pain because he lost his entire family. However, he seems to have gotten his life back on track. That's the end of this week's video. If you did enjoy this case, please do subscribe